Hey, fellow healers. I have had so many questions about cold plunging recently, so I wanted to dive right in, metaphorically speaking, of course. I hate being cold, and talk about cold plunging and how it relates to limbic system healing. Hi, for those who are new, my name's Teresa. I am a licensed mental health therapist, a yoga therapist, and an herbalist, and I talk all about limbic system healing and holistic ways of healing ourselves from things that just need a little bit of extra help along the way. I don't like to overemphasize diagnoses or symptoms, but sometimes we have to talk about those a little bit. And in this video is one of those times that I will be diving into specific diagnoses and symptoms that we have to take into consideration if we're talking about something like cold plunging. So, cold plunging, or as sometimes we call it, cold immersion therapy or cold exposure, involves exposing our body to cold temperatures, usually through dunking into cold water. Our limbic system is involved because this is something where it's kind of a shock to our system, and our limbic system is responsible for emotions and motivation and memory. So, a lot of the reasons people do cold plunging is it has been scientifically shown to reduce stress. It actually triggers the release of stress hormones like cortisol, but then over time, because we're almost gaining a resilience through practicing something like this often enough, it's associated with reduced overall stress levels and hormones. It helps to improve mood because it stimulates the release of endorphins, which is a natural mood enhancer. It increases alertness because getting super cold, who wouldn't be more alert? But part of this is due to our limbic system. Some people say they're having improved cognitive function and focus, and most of all, it's enhanced resilience. So, regular cold exposure is promoting physiological adaptations, so increased tolerance, and that improves resilience over time. Now, what are some cons? So, I will say cold exposure, again, it triggers the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. For some people, especially those probably on this channel with long-term issues with feeling locked into fight or flight mode, having limbic system imbalance, this could exacerbate stress rather than alleviate it. It can be really uncomfortable if you have anxiety or you hate being cold. Maybe not the thing for you, although for some people they say it started really uncomfortable and it helped them learn some distress tolerance. But everyone is so different. So, what I wanted to jump in and talk about is there are very specific instances where cold plunging is not a good idea because it's all over the news. It's on Shark Tank, it's on YouTube, everyone's doing it. A lot of people are like, well, this might just heal me and help my limbic system. It's healed all these other people. What I wanted to say is specifically as someone who has a cold allergy, this is not always a good idea for everyone. No matter what I have done in my limbic system journey, I still have a very specific allergy to the cold. If I am exposed to cold temperatures, as soon as the weather drops below 30, I break out in hives all over my body. I end up with asthma issues and really cold air. So I know for me, cold plunging is not a good idea. One time, all my friends were jumping in the ocean. I jumped in the ocean. I ended up having all over hives and having an asthma attack. My husband had to run to the car and get my inhaler and my Benadryl. It was not fun. And this was after doing quite a lot of limbic system retraining. It's one of those things that my body just has that my limbic system healing journey has not quite led to healing yet. So, for someone with mast cell activation syndrome or MCAS, where the mast cells, which is a type of immune cell, release excessive amounts of chemical mediators and histamine issues, jumping into a cold plunge could have a similar reaction to what I'm describing. Cold exposure might stimulate mast cells and lead to the release of histamine and other inflammatory mediators, and so you might be more prone to an exaggerated mast cell response with itching, hives, abdominal issues, or even anaphylaxis in rare cases. That histamine release can give us a range of different issues depending on the person. So I don't want to say specifically what could happen, but if you have MCAS, you do need to be careful that this could exacerbate your symptoms. You could work on more gradual exposure. I do know people that are just practicing washing their face with cold water for a refreshing feeling. Definitely consult with your healthcare provider if you've had systemic reactions before. Monitor your symptoms for sure. If you have POTS, which, hi, I have a lot of these things, or I have in the past. Cold exposure can actually impact you in some different ways. It can lead to vasoconstriction, narrowing of the blood vessels. A lot of people with POTS also have Raynaud's, so exposure to the cold, if you already have Raynaud's, can lead to chilblains, which is almost a type of frostbite because your blood vessels are already so constricted, and it will basically, your body is not allowing blood flow to your hands and feet. So cold plunging can really exacerbate that condition as well as POTS. If you already have issues with blood circulation, that vasoconstriction can make your lightheadedness and your dizziness worse. Also, orthostatic stress. When we have difficulty maintaining our blood pressure when we stand, cold plunging might give us some additional stress on the cardiovascular system that can worsen those symptoms. Cold exposure can lead to an increase in heart rate because the body's working really hard to generate heat. And if you have POTS, we know that our heart rate is already up here a lot of the time. So this might not be the best thing for us. And it can just increase fatigue, weakness, brain fog. Again, you could work on some gradual exposure, being really hydrated, making sure your electrolytes are balanced, but there might be other ways that we can improve our functioning of our limbic system and get the same endorphin rush without something that has such a risk. Adrenal fatigue is, again, this is not a clinical diagnosis, adrenal fatigue specifically, but it is something that we use as a general term when we have fatigue and body aches and nervousness and chronic stress response and overworking of the adrenal glands. Cortisol is a big player in this. The cold exposure, which triggers the stress response, which releases the stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, if you already have adrenal fatigue, this is the last thing we want to be doing to exacerbate our condition. It's going to lead to more of an exhaustion. It might lead to an overworking of the adrenals, which are already feeling really shot at that point. If you have different immunocompromised issues or autoimmune issues, we need to look at this idea that cold exposure might temporarily suppress the immune system, and this could impact our ability to fight infections, the stress hormones getting released, whereas for some people that adrenaline and cortisol balance and the endorphins that get released during this feels good if you're healthy in general. It's not going to be quite as healthy if you're suffering from an underlying condition. So, let's talk about some of the good stuff. I don't want to say that cold plunging is bad for everyone. There are a lot of healthy benefits for autonomic functioning with the autonomic nervous system, which regulates our involuntary body functions like our heart rate, blood pressure, digestion. If you don't have a condition that makes cold plunging potentially dangerous, it could be really good over time, or it could be something that you could work up to doing over time. Cold exposure is associated with increasing our vagal tone, so the activity of our vagus nerve actually is improved, and we are then better able to regulate our autonomic nervous system. We have better heart rate variability, helps us adapt better to stress, and some cognitive benefits like we mentioned before. We can gradually get back into something like this and work on maybe even exposing ourselves to cold and then to warm and noticing where our window of tolerance is if it's something that we're new to. The Wim Hof method is something that, if you look up this guy, he is a Dutch extreme athlete. They call him the Iceman. He has trained himself through breath work and mindfulness to be able to withstand really extreme cold temperatures. I mean, I just am not that extreme. If you look up some of his breath work and his controlled hyperventilation and the way that he's been able to adapt to stress, it is really interesting. It is really cool. I don't think as someone who already has a super stressed out limbic system, it's a good place to start. I think we want to be working on going from being locked into fight or flight sympathetic mode and being more into a nice relaxed parasympathetic mode for a really long time, so that when we have a release of cortisol, adrenaline, endorphins, we're actually entering a different body state where we can regulate. When we're already locked into fight or flight mode all the time, we probably have excess cortisol and adrenaline pumping through us already, which leads to a lot of our symptoms of limbic system imbalance. Adding more fuel to that fire is probably not a good idea. Again, I just hate the cold, so I don't mean to laugh. I know some people love cold exposure. It's just every time I think about it, it just feels miserable, and I literally feel cold talking about it. The one thing I wanted to mention is cold exposure works with our dopamine levels. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's involved with our mood, motivation, reward system. So when our stress response is triggered, it can influence the release of dopamine. It helps with our rewards pathways. We're doing something challenging and then we're successful with it. So our dopamine is increased and it gives us a good feeling of having accomplished something. But there are other activities that have a similar effect on dopamine. Regular exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, if we can tolerate it, is known to increase dopamine. Regular sunlight exposure, socializing, positive social interactions, that polyvagal theory, listening to music, dancing, achieving other goals, doing mindfulness and meditation. There are a lot of ways that we can get a similar dopamine response that aren't as stressful to our body. So, at the end of the day, do I think cold plunging is horrible? Do I think no one should do it? No, I think for some people it's really awesome. Does it sound terrible to me? Yeah, like I don't want to do it. I don't even want to work on that being a goal for my window of tolerance. I hate being cold. I moved to Florida to escape being cold. It was cold last week and it was miserable to me. I did not like it. I kept thinking, did I not move far enough south? This is terrible. I really am not a fan of this. So, if it's something that you have as a goal, work on slowly, incrementally training yourself to be able to handle exposure to cold. You could hold some ice cubes to get a different sensory experience. You could notice if that triggers anything, if that triggers Raynaud's or vasoconstriction in your hands. You could work on putting a cold towel on your face or your neck. Notice if you feel any sort of response like feeling faint, which could indicate that there's a POTS issue or some kind of regulation issue going on. You could practice just sitting with your feet or your legs in cold water so that you don't want to just jump into something because everyone else is doing it and experience a reaction. Overall, can it be helpful for the limbic system? Yeah, but I do think, based on all the research I've read, this is something that's helping people who in general had a pretty balanced nervous system to begin with. So when they get that adrenaline shoot up and that cortisol shoot up and the endorphins and then the dopamine, it's because their regular baseline is here. If you're already dealing with limbic system imbalance, you might be in a state of constant release of adrenaline and just like feeling like you're running on fumes, in which case this might push you over the edge into a stress response. I hope that my explanation was enlightening or maybe humorous, at least for some. When everyone was asking me to talk about this, I was like, I hate the cold. How am I going to give like an impartial idea of what I think about cold plunging? I hope I did my best. But if you have any questions or you want to see any more videos about how different health trends relate to chronic illness or limbic system healing, please put that in the comments below. I hope that my farm animal noises in the background are not bothering anyone in my videos. I really don't have an escape from it. I run an animal rescue. There's going to be animal noises. My microphone is supposed to have some noise blocking, so let's hope that the roosters and dogs are not getting picked up constantly. I hope you have a great week full of healing, and thank you so much for watching.